Okay, it's September the 8th, 2019. George Webb, down on the Chesapeake, down close to the Chesapeake, on the Pax River, actually. And I'm at the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory, which is actually in a town called Solomons, named after, I think, Solomon's Island, I think. My dad served in the Solomon's Island, Guadalcanal and so forth, New Georgia, Bougainville. And so you can see this is, we're out in front of a NOAA facility, and this NOAA facility is for collecting oceanic and atmospheric information. That's the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. And we, in our story, have NOAA quite a bit. You'll be able to look down, if you remember our Pax River, when we did our Pax River story, the naval station was down there. That's the famous Nav Air location where we talked about those P3s, those P3 Orions. These are surveillance planes. There's a P8, which is a larger 737, or I believe it's a 737, maybe 747, that's reworked for doing surveillance operations, doing, if you're looking for a submarine, for instance, you're flying over with these different Raytheon antennas looking for subs or whatever. Here, they also drop sonobuoys. My dad worked in the sonobuoy plant for a while at Magnavox Corporation, and basically it's a microphone sitting in the water. Here they actually deploy different meteorological devices out in the water, and they stay out there about a month for tracking the temperature and tracking things like pH. Those are the folks doing the ecological stuff. And where I intersect with this story and where Jeff Epstein intersects with this story is, again, if you go back to Mission Essentials, they have the regular organizations for bringing people into institutions like this, science institutions, and they're very qualified. I looked at some of the graduate work that's being done here, master's thesis, PhD thesis. They're very legitimate. There's always the one guy in the back, though, that is not a scientist. There's always one guy in the back with the glasses that you don't, he has a nickname. Nobody knows his real name. Nobody ever asks him about what he's studying. That's the guy that's doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And the reason I say this is I'm very familiar with a NOAA location. Remember, NOAA is Molly McCollum. She's the one who gets eaten by she has the two giant Great Danes with her. She's walking up there in Baltimore, home, near the Democratic National Convention, and she's the one who's murdered. No one bothers to call 911 in a very upscale neighborhood. Remember, the person who's the librarian of Resources for the Future, which is the company she's involved with, the sort of the funding arm, if you will, the NGO funding arm of that, is Scott Clotworthy's relative. So again, the Clotworthys, National Reconnaissance Organization, going back to this drugs for weapons, as we always seem to get involved with. Remember this organization, Resources for the Future, ties directly into Genie Energy with Bill Richardson and Jim Woolsey and the Rothschilds and Rupert Murdoch, etc. And it takes us right to this rotten core, this rotten seed amongst all these good scientists. Remember, Jeff Epstein has numerous foundations where he's funding scientists, but we do have this recurring phenomenon that's occurring where 1 out of every 5 seems to have no qualifications whatsoever. The same thing with translators that he seems to be bringing in from other countries. They can't speak the actual English language. They can speak the remote language, Urdu, in Pakistan, but then they come into the United States, they can't speak English. We had this problem with Gulen bringing English teachers from Turkey who could barely speak English. Makes no sense to be teaching American kids English. So what I'm saying here is this is a classic infiltration strategy. Classic infiltration. Why? It's easy to get visas. It's very easy in America to get a student visa. You bring the person in on a student visa. Again, many legitimate students come in on these programs, but then again, I plant that bad seed. Remember, if I can somehow inculcate drug operations, let's say the Dennis Montgomery is the one I'm familiar with in NOAA, which is the NOAA ship. The NOAA ships are over here behind me, in the port behind me. If I can inculcate putting out sounding devices, putting out different buoys out in the ocean, then a diver can come by and pick those up later. It's a perfect drug drop. Or there's a lot of ship traffic coming up and down the Chesapeake Bay. And again, Marcus Conte informed us that it would be easy to throw something off a ship at night that's weighted, and then the divers go out at night to get it, or on a regular diving trip. Again, you only need one out of a group of 30. We had a group of 35 or so just die off the coast of Santa Cruz, I believe. Very unusual, where one person, 37 divers die and then one person gets away. Interesting. The foul play may be involved. So that's the type of scenario, that's the type of metadata that we look for in these situations. Now, going over to talk about the associates of Jeff Epstein, again, we talk about the devices, the platforms for collecting this intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance information. Then what do you do with the software? How do you analyze the software that comes from that? And can you basically create a need, like let's say a 9/11 event, to then sell the software? Well, the Amazing Polly has done some work with a company called Chilian, which was doing exactly that. They were going to connect the dots. They were going to connect the dots from 9/11. Who's involved? Well, Michael Chertoff from, again, a organization tied closely to Mossad. You've got Bob Maxwell, as we've talked about in our series over and over again. You have Jeff Epstein, you have Les Wexner, you have Ronald Lauder from Estee Lauder. These same Bronfmans, etc., keep coming back over and over in our story. The latest one that Whitney Webb did an expose on was a company called Carbine 9/11. Carbine 9/11. They're going to do predictive crime, sort of the thing that you would see in a Minority Report with Tom Cruise, where they're pre-crime, they call it. We have Palantir that, again, Peter Thiel is investing in. Again, Jeff Epstein's involved in all these investments. So which scenario is correct? Is Jeff Epstein just a pervert with now 140 victims? Or is he actually training a spy school? Is he training people to come into places like this under the cover of being a scientist or a journalist or whatever, to then either do spying for intellectual property in places like this, or for people that are doing surveillance applications out in the field, doing more like a drug type of business? I can tell you from personal experience with Evergreen Aviation, at least as far as Oregon is concerned, Washington is concerned, Evergreen Aviation in Arizona and Evergreen Aviation in New Mexico, it is drugs. That part I'm sure of. That part I can tell you, down to the airport and down to the people who've told me it's drugs. Columbia Helicopter, Evergreen Aviation at the Canby Airport. So we're not guessing. We're not guessing as far as Jeff Epstein's involvement. And I'm going to say right now, it's Governor Goldschmidt was very much a part of that. He was the governor of Oregon and also Department of Transportation under Jimmy Carter. Again, that's the Zbigniew Brzezinski era where the drug for weapons started. And again, these were the Mujahideen. At the time, they were on our side. Osama bin Laden was on our side. We were funding them with weapons in Project Cyclone, and we were teaching them how to grow opium to pay for the weapons. And the only problem is that when we won the war, 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed from supporting that war, the drug business didn't stop. It kept going. And the weapons business kept going. Instead of putting the weapons there to fight the Russians, they started exporting those weapons all over the world in conflict areas all over the world. It became known as Operation Cassandra, and the Awans picked it up after the year 2000. We have the technology companies that are being invested in that are going to also be Jeff Epstein oriented, and John Brennan. We have this G-Tech company. We've got other Gates technology companies, and the analytical company, TAC, by John Brennan. So those are just a few of the names, but you get the big idea that the generosity of America, with all of its great institutions providing a scientific haven for people to come here and do their scientific studies, get their masters at places like the Chesapeake Bay Laboratory, also are an attractive target for the Jeff Epsteins of the world for drug running, unfortunately. And you can use the same technology, you can use the same hardware for instance, the Sonoboys, and dropping these different recording devices. Again, you can use shells in a range, etc. You can fill them up with a drug payload. This is so reminiscent of what was happening in Piketon, Ohio. I go to Piketon, Ohio 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago. Why? Because the whistleblowers say, George, there's no UF6 gas, there's no uranium in these casks. They're empty. All we do is clean them. All we do is clean them. And again, that's another company that Jeff Epstein is going to be involved with transport logistics. So we're going to leave it right there today. We'll talk a little bit tomorrow about the PROMIS software, and we'll talk about the involvement of Bob Maxwell in the PROMIS software. Remember, Bob Maxwell uses a U.S. senator to place people into Los Alamos. Again, much like here, you'd put a PhD in here. The same thing that Jeff Epstein did through John Tower to place his scientists into Los Alamos, and also get people fired out of Los Alamos to create holes for people. So we're going to leave it right there here at the beautiful Chesapeake Bay Lab. We're going to talk about all the different countries, by the way, that Bob Maxwell sold the software to as well, creating a backdoor in many countries, not just Los Alamos, not just New Mexico, but all the labs and various national laboratories in different parts of the United States, and about 20 different countries around the world, including selling the software, including selling the PROMIS software to the Russians, to the KGB.